Welcome to Legacy Conversations, a channel where we preserve military memories and history.
Hello, Internet. I'm truly excited today. I have to tell you, we've been making hundreds of videos here at Legacy, and I've really struggled to get hold of a policeman where I come from to talk to us. So there's a standing invitation to all members of a South African police force, even if you went over to the police service afterwards, or railway police, man, you're welcome. Yeah, please come and talk to us. We really want to talk to you. Military police, I want to speak to you as well, because there's a lot of rumors and nonsense about the police out there which people don't know about. And we have a chance now, a unique chance to actually tell you about what happened and what didn't happen. And one of the units which I'm especially, of course, interested in, because I served in it 6 times, was the old South African Police Force Counterinsurgency Unit. Now, for most of the national servicemen, the war started here in about 76 and perhaps a bit later, as the guys got called up. And 1 year or 9 months became 1 year, and then it became 2 years. Actually, as you will hear in this video, I'm quite sure my guest will tell you that the SAP were fighting long before that. In fact, I think of all the units, I probably have the most experience, even more than Special Forces, because they were there before Special Forces. I suppose there's a lot of you who know that I'm actually an author. I wrote many dozens of books. And I can tell you, it doesn't take me long to write a book. It takes me 2-3 weeks and I write a 400-page book. And after my wife passed, Melissa, I wrote 53 books, 48 of them in a row under the other name. And I wrote one every month. I'm sure it's not kind of a record. But that's what happens, when you're so grief-struck that you don't want to be in this world, you want to be in another world, which is a better world in many ways. But in 2012, I was 20 years out of the SAP, and I spent 6 years there, and I was always on the street. I was known in Hollywood as a street cop. I started in King Williamstown, and then I went to the Pretoria Flying Squad, where I was primarily based there, except for about 2 years constant in the police counterinsurgency units. You would go for 3 months, come back for 2-3 months, go for 3 months. You went on like that for 2 years. And that was fantastic too, because I think we got 20 rands a day extra. I could buy my Technics hi-fi from it, which of course got stolen in the New South Africa. And yeah, what can I say? We're one of those things, man. But what bothered me most was I was getting very upset with all the lies and the nonsense which were written about the old SAP. Because we were honorable people and we served to the best of our abilities, and we saved a lot more people than what we killed. And where we had to kill, we were very much on a scrutiny. There were thorough investigations. I'm not saying that things didn't happen which should not have happened, but usually, that story of you being able to just murder somebody and get away with it is the biggest bullshit I've ever heard in my life. And I say so very plainly in my books. So I wrote what became known as the Mean Streets police books, and they are quite popular actually. For at one stage they were doing quite well. I gave most of them away for free because I wanted to spread the story around. I felt that after 20 years, I can tell what happened to me at least. But I went quite further, and I also explained a lot about the police and the reasons behind the reasoning and so forth. And I think it's an eye-opener for those outside. Many said to me that it is probably the closest you can get to that time in that police, in that unit, and other units where I served than any other book, because it deals specifically with me. And there's nothing really special about me, but I can tell you this. After I wrote those books, I made peace with my past, and I could carry on with my life. So The free books are available in South Africa, the English ones, or two of them anyway, Mean Streets 1 and Mean Streets 2. You'll see the links in the description and all the descriptions of all the videos. You just order the thing, they courier it to you and you read it and write a nice review. And then on Amazon, there's actually 4 of them. All of them are in paper as well as Kindle, hardcover, softcover, and also the Afrikaans book. Geweten was 'n strate. Now, basically, that book is the first 2 English books just translated. I am not a good author in Afrikaans, so I struggle to express myself. But I did my best, and there's a lot of people who actually enjoyed it. So if you are interested in police books and you're interested in hearing what happened, the story of my life in the SAP, then please just get hold of the books and read it. As I always say to you, if you read these books, or the George and James books, our main sponsor, or Rebecca's books, or the ones we wrote together, you know, you're supporting legacy, you're supporting us to carry on here, to do what we do. Let me say hello to my guest here. It is Captain Retired of the Police, Martin Loubser. Marcel, you sir, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time. I also want to thank your wife who's assisting us here with the technical details, which we don't always know. Really grateful to her as well. And the captain also is the chairman of a police counterinsurgency known as COIN, Bond, which, to my shame, I have to admit to you, I didn't even know existed until I found out they existed. And therefore, I'm very grateful to have him here. I suppose there's a lot of you who know that I'm actually an author. I wrote many dozens of books. And I can tell you, it doesn't take me long to write a book. It takes me 2-3 weeks and I write a 400-page book. And after my wife passed, Melissa, I wrote 53 books, 48 of them in a row, under the other name. And I wrote one every month. I'm sure it's not kind of a record, but that's what happens, you know, when you're so grief-struck that you don't want to be in this world, you want to be in another world, which is a better world in many, many ways. But in 2012, I was 20 years out of the SAP, and I spent 6 years there, and I was always on the street. I was known in Hollywood as a street cop. I started in King Williamstown, and then I went to the Pretoria Flying Squad, where I was primarily based there, except for about 2 years constant in the police counterinsurgency units. You would go for 3 months, come back for 2-3 months, go for 3 months. You went on like that for 2 years. And that was fantastic too, because I think we got 20 rands a day extra. I could buy my Technics hi-fi from it, which of course got stolen in the new South Africa. And yeah, what can I say? We're one of those things, man. But what bothered me most was I was getting very, very upset with all the lies and the nonsense which were written about the old SAP. Because we were honorable people and we served to the best of our abilities and we saved a lot more people than what we killed. And where we had to kill, we were very, very much on a scrutiny. There were thorough investigations. I'm not saying that things didn't happen which should not have happened, but normally, usually, that story of you being able to just murder somebody and get away with it is the biggest bullshit I've ever heard in my life. And I say so very plainly in my books. So I wrote what became known as the Mean Streets police books, and they are quite popular actually. For at one stage they were doing quite well. I gave most of them away for free because I wanted to spread the story around. I felt that after 20 years I can tell what happened to me at least. But I went quite further, and I also explained a lot about the police and the reasons behind the reasoning and so forth. And I think it's an eye-opener for those outside. Many said to me that it is probably the closest you can get to that time in that police, in that unit and other units where I served than any other book, because it deals specifically with me. And there's nothing really special about me, but I can tell you this. After I wrote those books, I made peace with my past, and I could carry on with my life. So the free books are available in South Africa, the English ones, or two of them anyway, Mean Streets 1 and Mean Streets 2. You'll see the links in the description and all the descriptions of all the videos. You just order the thing, they courier it to you and you read it and write a nice review. And then on Amazon, there's actually 4 of them. All of them are in paper as well as Kindle, hardcover, softcover, and also the Afrikaans book. Geweten was 'n strate. Now, basically, that book is the first 2 English books just translated. I am not a good author in Afrikaans, so I struggle to express myself. But I did my best, and there's a lot of people who actually enjoyed it. So if you are interested in police books and you're interested in hearing what happened, the story of my life in the SAP, then please just get hold of the books and read it. As I always say to you, if you read these books or the George and James books, our main sponsor, or Rebecca's books, or the ones we wrote together, you know, you're supporting Legacy, you're supporting us to carry on here, to do what we do. So tell me, Captain, where do you come from? Can you tell me briefly about yourself? How you ended up in the police, and what happened to you? Just tell us the story.
Okay, because I started off, well, I matriculated in 1973, the age of 17. And then I went to university because I wanted to become a veterinary surgeon, but that wasn't me. So after my second year academic, my second year historic and my first year academic, I joined the police at the age of 20 in 1976. I was there from January to June. And that was a special year because when we were ready to pass out in 1976, on the 16th of June, 3:30 that morning, we entered Soweto on the back of the Bedford. And we fought we stood against those riots that started there. That was my first encounter in my life at the age of 20 with any kind of violence. So that was quite an eye-opener. Now we went back after the Soweto ordeal and we passed out. And those days I didn't really talk to you. The later us into a canter, or the Goomba as we called them. And after a lot of hours on the road, I climbed out to Pietermaritzburg. After I asked for Pretoria and volunteered for Waterstrand. But anyway, we got off at Pietermaritzburg. We met our provincial commissioner. And then we started going one by one, and then they loaded me off at the police station. And I didn't know where I was. I went in, there was nobody there. There was nobody there in the charge office because of the fact that they were visiting the cells. And then I asked somebody outside, where am I now? They said, you had Danhaus. I thought it was in Germany. But anyway, an old man walked into the charge office, and I was taught that when somebody walks in, you stop everything and help. And I asked him in Afrikaans, kan ek help hom? First help laughed and said, jy my help, ek kan jou help. Ek is Luitenant Langley, ek is jou stasiebevel. So I met my station commander there. But then, long story short, that's where it started. And then in 1978, at 2 years service, I was called into his office one and said, listen, I'm sending you on COIN course, a tin cursus. Now, COIN was the abbreviation used for counterinsurgency, and in Afrikaans, tin teen insurgency. One of the people in America that I spoke to said, you're actually talking about the ATF, the anti-terrorist force. I said, it's just like that. It's just another. But anyway, 78, I went for my COIN course, and I talk about it a little bit later. It's extremely extensive. You must really, you must really show, and you must commit, because it's 6 weeks of hell. But when you finish there, you're safe. I mean, you can fight and you know what to do and what not to do, because a lot of people don't make that course. So I was back at the station, I think, for 3 weeks. They called me up for my first trip to the Angola border, Charlie Company. A lot of things happened there. But I carried on. Going until 1981. 81, I was promoted, then I was transferred to Zululand. That's where I learned to speak Zulu. And I was station commander at Ngome from 81 to 87. And then, because my children were starting to grow up and there was no schools there, and of course, of all my experience in different police work, at that stage I was a collisions expert. I was the prosecutor. I did every case in the book, and that included an aircraft accident. So because of my expertise, they transferred to police college where in 1987, June, I started doing training. It was basic training first, and I could never sit still. So I went and I was an academic instructor, but I also became a drill instructor because I started training the military bands in 1989. So I took them for drill, I took them for weaponry skills. I did their class and I trained the band as well. And that's how it went. And then in 94, I started doing advanced training. I started training trainers. 1996, my father did the field training program in the South African Police Service, which was very important because you can't do police work only on knowledge. So the field training program taught the skills. And yes, I retired in 2016 on the 29th of February, which this year, fortunately, there is no 29th. It's only 28 days this year, but that year that I turned 60. I turned 60 on the 27th of February 16, and that was on the Friday, and I had to go back to work on the Monday, 29th. That was my last day. Yeah, and now I've retired. Tomorrow it'll be my 69th birthday, and Saturday I would have retired exactly 9 years. But after I retired, in 2014, Monday, an old man from Kufut contacted, says, "Do you have a black jacket? Do you have medals?" Yes, I do. He says, "Put it on, meet me at Grootrekker Money." So, Willie Fouchier was his name. So I went there. I still wore my IPA jacket, blazer. And I was surprised to see what happened there, because what I did not know is that everybody that was involved in the South African border war belonged to some veterans organization. My wife Ilana and I were invited to a banquet by Dr. Mpho Palace, previous mayor of Dover. And I was surprised to see that there are 55 veterans organizations represented there. But anyway, I looked at all this, and he says the reason why you are here, that everybody's on board except the SAP coin unit. I said, okay. So, long story short, there was somebody that asked, why is coin not on board? We were the only people of all the units in the war, and that includes the defense force, all of them, that was not on board yet. So I'll talk about Kufut later, but they were the people that brought us on board. And then Willie Fouchier from Kufut was then the founding meeting was on, let's get it here, on the 7th of June, 2014. I was there, my wife was there were 3 guys from Kufut. But anyway, that's where it all started. It started at Rooiberg here near in the northern province. And there it all started to work. I was then at that stage elected to the management body, other guys from Kufut. But we then had to work to start with things like a constitution, because you can't fly by night. Everybody has the same models, the same rules, but you stick to certain rules. For example, and I had a fight with a lot of guys, not fights, but I just battled to explain to people you can't become a member of the SAP Coin Unit Veterans League if you did not do border duty and that you were not, and if you're not awarded the police medal for combating terrorism. That, I mean, you can't become the head girl of a boys course. It just doesn't work like that. But yeah, we did the Constitution, and we started looking at our veterans dress. You see, there's a uniform kind of see jackets. I mean, different colors. Maybe the SA Legion, they green. But it was absolutely an eye opener to see all these people there. We saw the Iraqis, we saw artillery, infantry, medics, sappers, uh, Air Force, Kufut guys, and yeah. So we started crawling in 2014, and now 10 years later, 11 years later, especially in the Pretoria area where everybody knows the history. And I must be honest, it was difficult for them to learn that the police was there before them and that we actually started over. But the history is written up, and I have the whole history here. And give me go ahead, tell you about it. But anyway, uh, in 2015, 2015, well, in 2015, early 2015, Mawali Fashir died, and then they elected me as the chairman of this league, and yeah, it's now 10 years later, and I'm still doing the job. Can't seem to get rid of it. But my wife is young, but she's also the treasurer and she's the admin. So it's just if you see what the Bible says. It says if you want to be a serve your people, don't get served because so we are a very strong organization. There's a lot of camaraderie between the guys. What makes us different to other veterans organizations is that our women and children are involved because we have what we call a supporters corps. Now they wear exactly the same dress as I wear, except for the pocket badge at the bottom here. It says ondersteuner, supporter. Now my son was 14 years old. He wore the uniform. He went out, marched with, saluted, laid a cross. The only thing is with the supporters corps, and this is why my young wife also wears the uniform, that they must resort under the wings of veterans. Must make sure that they stick to the constitution, and then of course when they certify that their supporter knows salute and honor, knows when to stand, when to salute, how to stand to attention, then only he can wear the uniform. Otherwise, there's a lot of supporters that don't wear the uniform, older married, but we are all together. So every year when we have our memorial service, it's like what they call in Afrikaans nagmaal op Naamspreit. They come from all over the country. Now, our Coin Veterans League members are scattered all over the world. If I think of Kutsia, is the most west. He's in Texas. And the extreme east, we have members in Australia and we have members in New Zealand. There are a lot of members in the Emirates, London. I had the guy from London visiting me the other day, Mark Jackson. And well, they're all over the world. And if you hear what I say today, qualify to join the league, we'll have you there where you are too. So, yeah, that's basically the background.
Yes, I am qualified. I do have a medal for combating terrorism twice, and I did serve on the borders. And I was definitely part of SAP Coin, so I might even join you guys and see what we can do here in Thailand. But that's how it started. But that brings me to a question. If somebody actually do want to join, what do we do?
It's actually very easy because you send us an email. Just give us your email address, and then my wife Ilana works with it. So we give you it's a little process she goes through. She gives you a answer form, application form, complete it in full, send it back, check on it, and she takes you through the process. And then after that, we look at how you get hold of your ceremonial dress and all that. Put you on a WhatsApp group, put you on a Facebook group, and I must say our WhatsApp group is extremely busy, but we start in the morning every morning we start with, shall we say, a religious message. Three of us that post Christelike boodskap. So that's one thing I want to say about the members, and it seems to be something that you find with people that was on the borders, that they are close to God and they're not scared to testify for Him. So every morning, Ilana posts one, and then another guy from management that posts one. And another thing that we post on these groups is the fallen members, the names of the fallen members, and the dates that they. We have now the Wall of Honor. We have 108 names, and that is actually, if you look at it, 108 names in 23 years shows one thing. It shows discipline, because well, you can't help the guys that fell off cliffs and guys that drowned, but it shows you that the discipline the guys had kept them alive, because discipline was a difference between life and death. And not only on the border, at your police station as well. It is sorry to see how many policemen are today killed with their own weapons, and training is not what it was. But yeah. So as soon as we finished, you can expect your application form and become, because most of the things happen in Pretoria. The Potrak Monument with everybody. Ilana and myself, we were very busy through the year because we have to attend everybody's memorial services, because it became very popular. So they invite us to such an extent that the members around here can't keep up anymore. You can't go to a memorial service every Sunday. It starts becoming tedious. But then a lot of people, other places, especially when it comes to the 11th of November, where it's Poppy Day across the world, they go and represent Point, and they go to, especially ran by the Moths, they hold these memorial services, and then they attend and they represent our league, which is a very proud league. There's a lot of proud people that see it in the way that they maintain themselves and the dress. We have specific dress orders to our constitution that needs to be followed. So,
Well, I cannot help but notice that you're not wearing the standard Point beret, which for you people who don't know, here's mine. It looks like the Freedom Battalion stole this beret and put the buffalo head on it. But we had like the old SAP badge here. Now, to make a long story short, why is that? Why is it that you are wearing something else than what we used to wear?
Of course, it's easy to answer, because in 2014, when we started looking at what we are going to wear, the Point badge was easy, the one on my jacket here, because that was registered. It was heraldically registered in 1967 when the Point unit was founded, and a lot of people don't know that. But the first thing we said, and it wasn't even negotiable, that we're going to wear the registered badge, and we have the tie with a signal on, and that we are going to wear the camouflage badge. We stopped in our tracks. For the simple reason is that camouflage may not be worn in South Africa except by recce veterans. You can't believe it, recce veterans, because I don't know the history, but they fought in police camo, so they are allowed to wear the berets in the veterans world. And in the South African police, nobody may wear camouflage except these special task force, because that's still their uniform of today. They wear it, so we're not allowed then to wear it, because it's then too much. So we were denied that. We were not denied. There was a little bit of instructions about it, but the old police badge, which is the badge we fought under before 94, was approved, because it is obsolete at this stage. It's not registered. So we wore that. So we went for the dark green for two reasons, because that's the closest we could get to our camouflage, the green, the camouflage, and I myself, I'm a Angolan war veteran. There we did everything infantry style, kit back squad, driver vehicles. We were on foot. We did foot patrol 6 days, then 2 days in the base, 6 days out, 2 days in the base, and that's why the infantry didn't have a problem with us then using their color beret. So that's how things all started. There was a lot of hiccups that we had to sort at the beginning with constitutions and must nots and may I not and all that. Yeah, that's the answer.
But in the old days, the beret wasn't actually that much of a big deal to a special task force. You would know they are a special task force by the way they looked. They were very, very fit people. They still are. And of course, they had the parachute wings, the gold parachute wings. It is very big. It looks almost like a French army parachute wings. That's how you recognize them on the uniform, because just wearing a beret itself meant almost nothing. The riot units were added. The coin units definitely added. And I think the instructors at Milieuskop and the training bases also added. Is that correct? My summary.
Yeah, you see, camouflage at some stage was used in the college for people under basic training. That was totally stopped. And at Milieuskop, only the people that did coin training wore the camouflage. And still today, the South African Police Task Force, they work in camos. That is their everyday dress. The beret with the rest of the uniform. So the only people you will see in camouflage, in full camouflage at this stage, and I'm talking about the SAP camo. The reckies can only wear the beret, and that on ceremonial services, not every day, all day. So it's funny, but that's how things work.
I wonder if
Sorry?
these crews in Rhodesia, when the SAF went to Rhodesia with helicopters, they painted them SAP colors, and they also wore SAP uniform as, to fit in. They didn't want people to know that they are there. I wonder if they would be entitled to wear the beret.
Look, the people that served in Rhodesia, I'm not sure what they wore. I should actually find out. I have a few Rhodesian veterans that's still alive. But if they went to Rhodesia, I think they fell under Part 2, which is the police anti-terrorist unit, would wear their uniform. But they would go there in SAP camo and they would come back in SAP camo. And if then they would deploy to another place like the Angola border or the Caprivi or even the South African border, they would wear the camo again. It's just in Rhodesia that they were, but they were still fully fledged members of the SAP coin unit.
Can you tell me when did the SAP coin first moved into Rhodesia? Because that's where they started, and I think it was a political decision where the government of the day decided there might be South Africans among the terrorists fighting the Rhodesians, and therefore the South African police had to go and sort them out. And I do recall one of the old men said to me, the first trip to Rhodesia was actually in the normal blue uniform, and when they arrived there, they realized they're going to die, and they quickly borrowed Rhodesian camo. And then the Part 2 units, police anti-terrorist units, started, and as it went along, the SAP camo came in, but it looked slightly different from the camo which got later, of which this one is actually one of the later models. So what year was that? 67, around about there?
With your permission, Chris, if I can maybe tell the whole history of the SAP coin unit, because there's a lot of underlying facts that will explain some things, or that might explain things that not arise questions. Understand? So during March of 1966, there was information received of a SWAPO PLA terrorist training base that was set up somewhere in the north of Southwest Africa. That was in the west of Obamaland. The name of this place was Wulumbashe, and it was set up for the sole purpose of infiltration. And this is where you will understand that all this information was done by the SAP security branch. They started an operation called Blue Wildebeest. There was 150 selected policemen selected. They were drawn from various units and from their stations, and then they were exposed to an extensive counterinsurgency training. If I say counterinsurgency training, I'll come to that just now. But only 35 of these policemen qualified to now be part of the, shall I say, assault force that go there. And then there was also 11 members of the SA Army's parachute battalion under the command of Captain Jan Breitbach. You all know, and with the help of the crew of 6 Alouette helicopters from the SA Air Force. Now, it wasn't until August 23, 1966, that they were informed of exactly where they were going, what they were going to do. So on August 25, the attack force under the command of Colonel Pat Dillon of the SAP then flies to Ruacana. And on August 26, 1966, shortly after sunrise, the first helicopter takes off from Ruacana. They fly in the direction of Bashe Base. And not long after, the first shots rang out above the base, where terrorists decided to fire on the helicopter. Now, in the skirmish, 2 terrorists were killed, 1 wounded, and 8 arrested. And I can just imagine the others are still running. But anyway, it is officially then recorded in history that this was the historical beginning of, say, border war, or the Bush War, as some people refer to it, that would last for 23 years. Now, it's interesting to know that everybody that attack force of that day, these officers, parabats and helicopter staff, were all sworn in as policemen. So they were all policemen that day. Obviously for political reasons, because it wasn't a war then. Because after that, then it was free for all. But the SAP coin unit was officially established a few months later. It was really very, very close to the 16th of August, 26th of August. And police officers were then called up from police stations nationwide. A lot of people think, I'm talking about outsiders, the defense force, thought that the SAP coin unit, that was our job. And we were just there to fight. But it's people that were called up from police stations at that stage, as I told you, was stationed at Danhausen. So my first trip went there. Nationwide, and then intensive training in counterinsurgency that we were exposed to. And I'm going to tell you what this training so briefly consisted of, because a lot of people are under the impression that we did police work. Can't do police work in the middle of a war. We were trained in handling of assault weapons, and of course the R1, hand grenades, later also mortar bombs, rifle grenades. I myself was one of the 4 selected out of the 4 platoons, 36 times 4 policemen. I was trained as one of 4 mortarists for that specific base. So it was mortars, hand grenades, rifle grenades. When we went on patrol, we actually patrolled the R1, and we had a P103 rifle grenade on the barrel. So the first fire, when you hit contact, was the rifle grenade. That was the good news. The bad news is the rest of the contact that you shoot with your gas closed. But if you had the time to open the gas, it would be more normal. Yeah, so we were also trained in setting up ambushes and counter ambush techniques. Combat and skirmishing techniques, patrol techniques. Now, if I say patrol techniques, the policeman listens to me, the first thing he thinks is here a policeman patrolling. And I'm saying patrol techniques. Remember that, and I'm talking for the Angola border, we did patrol as a platoon, which means we were 36. So 36 people need to be attentive of each other. One thing that everybody knows that they're not allowed to talk. So the way that we worked, I can remember that we did a scorpion formation where you had to walk in your place. That's what I mean by patrolling techniques. And how do you use that specific formation? Now, we also did maps and compass reading, which didn't really work in the Wamland because the place is as flat as a pancake. Radio speech procedures. Now, that was quite a challenge there because everything we said in codes. Because remember that the enemy could be listening in. So the earlier policemen will remember the term slidex and griddle that we used there. Then we did survival techniques. And then one of the biggest ones, and I always thought, so this training was helicopter drill, where you do, see what it is, chopper drops. Now that instructor at Maluskop tells you once, maybe a second time, when you jump out, don't hold your rifle above your head. And then the guys forget when they jump out the head, that's when they crush their skulls and they lie down there up, unconscious for 5 minutes. Now then after your training, then you would be detached to the SA Police Coin unit and deployed on the borders. Now, this would mean that the police from the first day on the 26th of August 1966 had a full combat role. We didn't do police work, we had a full combat role throughout the war until the last day at the end in 1989. And we operated on the Angolan border, the Caprivi Strip, full expanse of the RSA border, right up to Mozambique, and then inside Rhodesia. Now, I was way too young to go there because I joined in 76 and the police, the Coin unit was withdrawn there in 1975. So why they went there, and so I say, I think it's but the same. Looks like South Africa always had some or other, let's say, diplomatic relations. I mean, our defense forces in the Congo now. There's a lot of members in the Coin League that have Sudan medals. Those all peacekeeping. So I don't know the history of Rhodesia, but yeah, they were withdrawn there in 75. Now, just to finish this, the first member of the SAP Coin unit to die on active duty was a Sergeant J.A. Nell. Listen to the date. And compare that to the 26th of August. Died on 7 March 1967. And he drowned during coin duty in the Kavango. The first member killed in action was in Rhodesia. That was Constable D. de Tooy. And that was killed on 18 July 1968. And he was killed then in a contact terror. So that's the full history of the Coin unit.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about that. I was just thinking while you were talking is one of the reasons why I joined the SAP is because I grew up in Katima Mulilo. I lived there for a few years in the late 70s. And of course, when you're 10 years old in a place like Katima Mulilo in 1977, 78, it's a huge adventure because the army is all over the place with their naughty cars. And then there was the police. Now, I'm not insulting the army guys, don't get angry with me, but the army guys look to me very much like an elder brother who happened to be in a branch, in a uniform. All clean shaven, very fit young men, great people, but I wasn't that impressed. And then there was the police counterinsurgency units. And now you see something else. Here you see a constable or a sergeant, they're older to start off, they're older than the national servicemen. They have this Worcester snorre, which I see the captain still has. They look mean. They look like men who knew how to fight, and many of them actually had on the uniform, and I saw this up to the 1980s. They had like a little thing here written PATU. Now, this PATU thing was part of a police anti-terrorist unit in Rhodesia. And if there's any of you still alive and you can tell me about it, I would really like to know a lot. Because a few of them, which I've met, were very, very experienced. And they knew everything about infantry work. In other words, their first instruction to us youngsters would be, look, you're going to walk far, get rid of half of what you're carrying and get rid of the other half as well, and then you're okay. You don't need more than ammo and water and perhaps a little bit to eat, but that's fine. That's all you need. You don't need more. It's very fascinating to me when we're talking out of experience. So I looked at the policemen, these worms, and I thought to myself, yeah, I would like to be part of them. Because they were completely different. Their uniform was different. Some of them had bush hats. Now that was another thing in Coin, which would have showed, the captain is nodding here at the background, which have showed you actually an old man, because it was hard to get hold of a bush hats as such. The beret you could still get hold of. And then a lot of us had these kepis almost, which was very good as well. And it had like a little thing you could roll it down to protect your neck against sunburn. But I can tell you now, God will not have mercy on you if certain instructors find you looking like a Cuban and a few other things in life. But it is most wonderful way of speaking. So this thing was rolled up and it was very, very neat. It even had things for your ears which you could tie it down. We cut that out. I was once almost arrested at Milieuscorp because I've cut my shirt into short sleeves, which apparently you're not allowed to do. But it was a whole range of uniforms. And that's one of the reasons why I actually joined the SAP is I really looked up to these people. And then I'm often asked, why is it that the police were so successful? And my theory, and it comes out in my books, I think Mean Streets too, the Mean Streets. I have a theory, and I want to discuss this with you, Captain, if you don't mind, sir. Where I say that the police unit, if you take a police platoon, or police, let's make it a section of 10 men. You're going to find people from the dark unit, you're going to find Sunup, you're going to find a detective, you're going to find a guy from Worcester, you're going to find somebody from the flying squad in Pretoria, my old unit, wherever. So you've got a whole combination of policemen there, and they are very, very good at wanting to know what's happening around them. And because they're so experienced, they have like a sixth sense. They can pick up things before, I would say, they're very well trained. I'm not insulting you. They're very well trained national servicemen. And because they were older, many of them had previous experience, and most of them, if they were in cities or places, would probably have been in shootouts many times before they actually get to the border. And so they had all these skills combined into finding terrorists and killing them, because we were really not there to arrest. Am I correct, sir? Am I summarizing this in the right way for you?
Yeah, of course, it's easy to explain. You're quite right. Before I go any further, our contact with the Defence Force guy, and there are specifically two defence units that I would like to lift out. Nowhere did a policeman operate without a medic with them, and those guys were great, operational medics, and a sapper. So if I talk for the Golden Border, I was only 61 kilograms then. I had to take the minesweeper and I had to go walk in the sand and find the stuff. So the thing beep, beep, beeps, you stand one side and you call the sapper. It was his job then from there on further. So, but we had one in the base, one medic and one sapper. But the difference between the two, remember that the National Defence Force at the age of 18, which is actually very young, you get called up and you go there because you have to. You didn't go there because you want to. And then remember, there are all these different units. If you look at the maintenance corps, sappers, they had one job. Your tiffies, they were mechanically inclined. Every unit in the Defence Force had its own speciality. That's what made them good when they came together. Because if you mix them, You have a specialist in each field. But with our poor policemen, remember, we were station policemen. And yes, you're right. We had to encounter every day. We had to encounter situations where you need to decide: is it me or is it you? Using your firearm correctly in accordance to Section 49 of the Criminal Procedure Act, all that. So we had that experience every day. If you look at the first time I was called up, 78. The last border duty I did was in 1981. So look at the amount of years. The guys that went up for national service, it depended on what unit they were. And if you look at the special forces, you look at it's now your reconnaissance corps, your Iraqis. They were trained extensively, but we didn't have a choice. They really drilled us, and it's not everybody that was called up for point training. It's not everybody that could go to the border as a detached with a point unit. They look at if you can handle this kind of things because you want to, not because you have to. And that's the main difference. So yeah, there was a huge difference in the levels of discipline with the policeman that was there. Because remember, they did that every day of their life as a policeman, where I say again, 2 years is nothing. 2 years is nothing if you're a national serviceman, and then they still have to call you to the border. But they were good. They were really good. If I look at the Parabats, we encountered a few of them. These guys are disciplined, but yes, you will never get the same amount of discipline because of the fact that the circumstances were totally different. I mean, we woke up and we went to bed for years and years and years. I did that for 40 years. I woke up in the morning disciplined, and I went to bed disciplined. I had to watch what I say, watch what I do, see how I dress. And that was the difference.
Yeah, there was a difference in weapons as well. I mean, we all had sidearms with us, which was normal for us, which was perhaps not that normal. I know the officers and medics which sometimes would have it. And of course, a R1 is a great firearm to shoot somebody with, especially behind a tree or something. And then we had the mag. I was very astonished. And right when we started Legacy, I spoke to a 3-2 battalion member who happened to be a SAP member as well, Kevin Johnson. And Kevin Johnson, I think, was a Loteling. I'm not sure what's that in English. He was drafted into the police about 76. And he, as all Lotelinge, had to do the SAP coined course. It was sort of, I don't know, I think there was an agreement with the army about it. So he said even then they had the mag, in other words, a light machine gun. And that thing, of course, is a real mobber. I mean, if that starts speaking, man, greatest thing ever. You just hear it. It's fantastic. And you can have a individual gunner. You can actually recognize him by the burst he's firing. And if you've seen something angry in your life, you have not seen someone as angry as a mag gunner wanting his new belt. He would be shouting, roaring, kicking, whatever. He wants that belt and he wants it now. But the army, according to Kevin, at that stage still had the brain, which they modified to shoot the NATO 7.51 round from the old 303. And that always struck me as a little bit weird. And the other nice thing which we had in coin, of course, was the Caspers, which we were very, very proud of. But we didn't have him right in the beginning. We also had to go through the run-up to the Caspers, but I personally really loved the Caspers. So how did you find the equipment which you received from His Excellency the Commissioner to go and do your work as a policeman in camo?
Yeah, look, we were issued with the R1 rifle magazines. That's what we had. And we were taken away with a hippo. Long before the times of the Casper, it was hippos. They dropped us off, they came back to base. And from there on, we were on foot patrol for 6 days. You stand up first light, you do your patrol, you lie down last light, and that's how we went. And then when we contacts is when we walk into each other. That's how it worked, because we walked in that sand. So that is how we did. That's why I said kit bag squad. So everything you want to eat, everything you want to drink, everything you want to fight with, you had to carry. So it was quite a weight. So I don't know if that answers your question. But then tomorrow morning you stand up and there you go again. And then if you walk into an ambush, that's when you fight. That's what I said. Or if you're on a contact, that's when you fight at P108, 103 away. Hand grenades, whatever. So we came up tops most of the time. And then we get to a rendezvous point, and then after 6 days they pick you up, you go back to the base. And then you have to do the Klaarstand and all the other little things and clean up and full sandbags. But yeah, and then as I'm saying, carried on year after year after year after year until some people from right at the beginning until when the war ended in 1989. So I became a station commander in 1981, so they stopped sending me. See, that is, and I'm not saying that it was not good. I think then I had peace of mind for the rest of my career, if you understand what I'm trying to tell you. Because it's not pleasant. A lot of people brag. They big mouth about what they did. But to any normal human being, it's traumatic. It's something that sticks with you up to my age. I'm turning 69 tomorrow and still I suffer from PTSD. I can't help it. But you have to look at what you say and how you say it. Sometimes it catches up with you. And yeah, that's the price you have to pay serving your country.
Well, congratulations on your birthday. It would be long gone by the time you people see it. But can you tell me, so what's the difference between Kufut, which everybody knows, and I have no problem with Kufut, and SAP coin?
Yeah, that is easy to answer. Just because the South African police on the border was the SAP coin unit. And people didn't know this. And what, this hartseer. If you still today find out that defense didn't even know that we were there. Although we started it and we had a full battle roll right through to 89, they still don't know that we are there. But now the people, if they think I'm lying, they went to spot up on the history. And if somebody say I'm lying, then I take it to Johan Visagie. He's my deputy chairman, but he was given the title of honorary president of the SAP Coin Unit Veterans League because he is actually the last living Ugulumbashe veteran. He was in that first skirmish. And he would tell you quickly what happened there. Kufut, remember now what I said just now is that everything, that's how it started, was done on information that was gathered by the police security branch. And Kufut started only in 79, and they operated until the end of the war in 1989. It's for 10 years. But it was also police, but it's sort of a uitvloeisel. What's that in English? Uitvloeisel. It was actually born out of the SAP security branch, following up with information. So it started off with small armed groups. And then they also had the Askaris with them, time terrorists and people that went with it. And then they were in these smaller battle groups and they would go looking for these people, but they were on wheels. They were the people using the class, but extensive. But later on, they didn't resort under the SAP anymore. They ended up resorting under the Southwest African police because they operated in totally a different way. Remember what I said? We were on foot patrols, and like with patrol areas, we were bound to an area. You can't go over your borders because they run yourself into your neighbor, which could be either a police company or a defense force company. So, but these people they were the only people that had the authority to go over the borders. And yeah, they did a good job. They were busy, but that was only later. I mean, they only started in 79. But they had a totally different role, and they only operated on the Angolan border. Going over the border if need be, and so on. So, yeah, we see each other at the memorial services. You will also see that on their beret, they wear the SWAPL badge because they sorted on South Africa. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, were there any black members in SAP Coin?
Yeah. Then if you can see behind me here, the Maluskop statues consist of two statues. One is a policeman standing, and then the one is kneeling. If you look carefully, you'll see that it's a black member. Yes, we were black and we were white members, and that's why I always say people must judge the SAP Coin. I owe my life to that policeman more than once in my 40 years of service, and I'm not shy to say that. They were just as well trained as us. And then actually in Novemberland, each one of us had a buddy, as they call it. These were the people of the Ovambo Home Guard. Each one had his own buddy. So mine was a sergeant with the name of Petrus. And not to go into the particulars of that specific day, but it's the longest, we call it, Afrikaans call it, it's going to follow up, following or running on tracks. It was 54, 55 kilometers that day. And he was the only one killed. Because when we were finished that day, we couldn't take it anymore. We went into a cooker shop because a little bit of water we had was finished. And of course, then you take refuge and you drink Mahangu beer if there's nothing else. But what we didn't know at that stage, they were also tired. So they were lying at ambush for us on the other side of the base. And in the meantime, all the hippos that were there to pick us up, because it was our last day, were on the pipeline waiting for us. And they were waiting for these guys to turn north and go over into the defense force area. But yeah, then we walked out. But this just as they were standing up out of their ambush positions. And there was a few shots fired, and they ran themselves into these hippos. They looked each other in the eye, and everybody was more surprised than the other one. And then they vanished like last month's pay. But anyway, these buddies, they were just as well trained as us. But we took charge, and you know what? There's no better way to learn is on the job. So they saw what we do, and if you're not happy with something, then you speak to your own buddy. And yeah, black people all around in Rhodesia, Southwest Africa border, Angola border, the Caprivi, South African borders, all along. It was black policemen, white policemen. There was no difference. We did the same job.
Very, very true. It's very true. And of course, the language abilities really assisted as well, because they could speak to it in the local languages. It's very important in counterinsurgency to be able to do that. But I noticed where you're wearing the police medal for combating terrorism, I think, if I translate it correctly, for combat from terrorism. Yes, and you have been awarded it 3 times or more, because you've got the 2 bulkies on it. I always say to people with our backgrounds, we look at men a bit differently than other men. We notice the medals, we notice whatever is on a man's chest. And now there's a big argument going, and I don't want to start something, but in terms of importance or ranking, would the police medal for combating terrorism be higher or lower or equal to the Pro Patria for the army?
No, that's actually easy to answer because you're talking in a speciality area. I didn't know if you know, but I'm a professional medalist. I mount medals. I've been doing that for years. And I'm still doing it. It's waiting for me. When I say bye, I'm going to continue with what I'm busy with. But yeah, the South African Police Medal for Combating Terrorism is senior to the Pro Patria. And not only to the Pro Patria, but the Pro Patria is junior also to the South African Railway Medal and whatsoever. Now people come and fight with me because if one of the people in the veterans organization, Schaefer Mark, he's our dog handler. People that come to memorial services will know him for his dog that always lays there. He wears both. He wears the South African Police Medal for combating terrorism and the Pro Patria. Now, the police medal is senior to the Pro Patria, and they get these guys coming to fight with. And it's actually very easy. And if you can remember this, it is Government Notice 202 of 1995. The Order of Presidents. Sorry, I just want to interrupt you. Leef my kapo daai. Ons gaan haal net daai lê daar rond daai ene met die oor. I'm just sending Ilana to go and get it so I can make sure of the number and the date. But each and every medal ever issued in South Africa, and this doesn't only include SA Defence Force and SA Police, it also includes the Railway Police, Department of Correction, and also MK and APLA medal. So unfortunately, yeah, I think the reason for that being that we were there first. But if you wanted this medal, when it was awarded to me in 1979, the specifications were that you had to be operational, and that you had to have contact with terrorists way back then. So and later on, they made it 60 days. So you'll see, if you have the medal, you can have 2 bars. It means that you were awarded the medal 3 times. At the same time, you would find people that were working in hospitals, for example, in Oshakati. That was awarded, they were awarded the Pro Patria. But it can't be. It is the same. It's just it was easier for people to get the Pro Patria than it was for the policemen to get the combating terrorism. But yeah, what I wanted to say is there's one medal of the Defence Force that sort of makes that sort of makes it more quality to the Pro Patria. It's a Southern Africa medal, and that is given for people that go cross border. Like Kufut did. Now, some of the Kufut members were awarded that. In the veterans situation, were awarded that medal by members of the Defence Force. Some of them. We did not qualify. We did not go over borders. So that one, and it's an army medal, for example. But yeah, unfortunately, this is the senior one. And that it's the Ilana fetched it for me. Have it here. It is number 202 of 11 March 2005. I said 95. I lied just now. From the presidency, and each and every medal that was ever issued is here now listed in the order of precedence. So if people want to go and look, we have APLA medals here, we have MK medals, RSA, Poputa Chana medals, Transkei medals. They all got their place in the hierarchy. So that's where this is an order. It's a government notice. So you can't wear it because you want to wear it. And there's another order of precedence. You always see your service medals, most junior, and then you have your commemorative medals. Then you have your war medals, and then a lot of my policemen wear what we call a decoration. The CPF, the Police Cross for bravery. You get matte silver, and gold. So that would be the most senior one. Your bravery. Yeah, your bravery medals are normally senior. The decorations are those that you write behind your name. Like the generals, they all write the SOE, which stands for Stella Officii Graecae, which is leadership. So most of the generals, when they become there for their leadership skills, they get the SOE. But that was before 2004, where the whole medal system changed in the police. They had a new 10-year service, a new 20, 30, something. And today you will never get they can't issue the old 10s, 20s, or the combating terrorism medal anymore. It doesn't exist anymore, and they don't make it. We're getting old, Chris. A lot of years ago.
Yeah. There's 2 things which came to me now. The one thing which is different in South Africa, I'm saying this for the overseas people, is that when you're awarded a medal, they do write your force number plus your name and rank at the back of it. It's engraved in it. Well, I know that in the US and places like that, they don't. So any idiot can go and get himself a silver star or whatever they have, and nobody will really know if he's awarded that or not, because there's no name on it. But in South Africa, you can check it. Is that also correct?
Yeah. Before 2004, if you look at my 10 and my 20, was issued before there. My name and my force number is engraved on it. After 2004, when the medals changed, like the 30 year, all these medals that was awarded has a number in the back of it. And that number is recorded next to my number and my name on my service record. Even till today, I'm out of service for 9 years now after I retired. But they call it the SP96. You can still go and draw that off the system, and you can see exactly what was awarded to the guy. And that's very easy way of getting rid of wannabes. I mean, everybody will know what I mean by wannabes. Everybody wants to be a recce. Everybody wants to be a parabat. So, but you can't beat these records. So all these things are on your record. I go back now for the full 40 years that I served. I have a full service record, and it's on the system. So even the older veterans, when they join, we asked for the 96, and I can see exactly what was awarded to him. So, yeah, you can't just go and buy one and get it.
Yeah, well, you bloody well shouldn't. I mean, these people will steal honor. We don't like you. But, you know, when you were talking about the generals, well, the things behind them, I recall we were practicing for our passing out parade, and that person I'm looking for, Warrant Officer Patrolling Nell, I hope he's still alive. He was like the RSM. He's a wonderful man. And you could hear him 10 miles away.
We work together. We work together, Chris. We work together in the college.
Yes,
we were warrant officers together.
So if he's still alive, please contact him and tell him you want to speak to him, because I've been asked about Patrolling Nell for a long, long time. It wouldn't be me who actually conduct the conversation, because I don't want to see him even this far away. But Kevin Johnson, he was Kevin Johnson's platoon sergeant in 1976 or 75, round about there. And so he said he will stand in as a host. But he was a wonderful man, with Patrolling Nell. And that day I saw him laughing, actually, because we were practicing the final steps of a parade. And a sergeant there who, I don't know where he came from, but he had the most fantastic voice. He had this real, and he would do the announcements. But he wasn't a local from a college, so we got him from somewhere. And he would stand there and he would announce it, and we would go through it. And then he would say, and I'm going to speak Afrikaans now, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but he would say something like, sy edele generaal, so and so, DOOS, SOE, SM. And it took us a while to start, and I had the entire parade ground after about 5 seconds started laughing, and I expected Patrolling Nell to blow a gasket. I mean, that's just not the man you laugh at his parade ground without orders. And so he just burst out laughing as well. But it was such a wonderful thing. If you don't understand what I said now, don't worry about it. It's an Afrikaans joke. We know what we meant. And well, it's for me. I must tell you, when I found out about your organization, I was extremely happy about it, and I still am. And I will join you. I will send the application to you. And I would urge everyone who qualifies also to do the same. If you've been in SAP Coin, if you have that medal and you think you qualify, then please join these people and see if you can keep the spirit alive.
Because it's not just about keeping the spirit alive. Remember legacy. When the last, this is what I actually forgot to say just now. How can children be involved? Who's going to carry the legacy when the last veteran dies? So a lot of people have started copying us with the concept of youngsters. I mean, Ilana, I'm 69 tomorrow, but now she's only turning 34 in September. So I have a young wife. And what is starting to bother me, she's starting to keep up now, as I'm getting older, but the youngsters, my son, who's a game ranger, Double Zimby area, and we have a foster daughter that's taken away and given to us just a month before her 16th birthday. She's also in the uniform, and she's fully. People have an interest in what we do. Now, Sunday past, we went to the Parabat uh, memorial service, and the supporter that went with me, I was for the veterans, and he was for the supporters squad. I carried the He's a Blitzpatrollie policeman. He's from the flying squad as well. He's the son of Johan Visagi, who is the Golumbashe veteran. So the oldest one is a member of the infantry. He's my guitar wingman in the church band. We play and sing together. He's from the infantry. He is 76. He's the oldest supporter. He doesn't qualify to be a veteran, but he's a supporter. And that is how we keep this thing going, because if the last veteran dies, it's the youngsters that must take the legacy and the history forward. So that's what you need to look after. Which also brings me to our memorial wall. There was a problem. If you don't know that, you'll see that all the memorial walls of all organizations are based at the Voortrekker Monument. Now, when we started off in 2014, one of the things that we were looking for is our statues. That's what you see behind you, those two statues. No, there were two statues done by the same person. Everybody knows the one in the Scottish stands on his rifle, and then these two at Malioskop. It's the same sculptor, Brigadier Bux van Staden. And what people don't know is that they were gegiet. They were made of thousands and thousands of melted R1 cartridges. So when Malioskop, where we were trained, where these statues was lost in a land claim, obviously all these things were withdrawn, and the statues went to the police museum. So I started asking, at that stage, I was the chairman already, started asking, can we have our statues, please? Can I have our statues? And I was dealing with national commissioners. And then Commissioner Piega was the one that said, like, after explaining what we want to do, because it's a waste when it stands in a museum where actually those statues are a symbol of your war history of the police. And nobody can argue the war away. So we wanted them so that we can go to the monument and have our own memorial wall. And obviously, a memorial wall contains the names of everybody that died in action at specific unit. So unfortunately, when I got them, two things, they were extremely vandalized. The arms were chopped off just under all four of the arms. The R1s were chopped off, and then that kit bag that was lying in front of the black member that was kneeling, that was also gone. And we just caught one of the arms in time where it was sold to a scrap metal dealer in Joburg. But anyway, what was bad then is that the monument refused then to accommodate our statues. They said no more military or apartheid statues. So okay, we went and fetched them, put them in the guy's garage, and then one of my veterans with a small holding, or a plot as we call it, Doornpoort, gave us a part of his small holding, a part of his plot, where he says put the statues up here. Today, it's the most beautiful memorial wall you can find. And it started small, because the first that we did is we put these two statues in cement blocks there where they are, where they were supposed to be. And then bit by bit, we built it we worked for the money because we sold things like these. The one that you see behind the miniatures, we sold for 1,500, but it's a limited edition. A lot of people wanted all of them, but we couldn't because we sold them. We made patches, we made flashes, we made mugs. But eventually, afterwards, we had enough money to start with this. Now, as soon as the memorial was built, we had to do all the marble slabs, and we even have a canine panel of dogs that died in action. And then we had a sculptor. So what happened now is the fact that the arms of the statues are missing. I took him to the police college, and lucky it was the same sculptor, so he could use there and the arm ones there to sort of get them in uh, comparison with the others. So yeah, they fixed them, made them with clay, and then an old Navy guy, a Floaty, an English guy, came and fixed this whole thing with resin. So I was actually, if you are interested to see what the Picoin Unit Memorial Wall looks like, it's on 60 Breed Street, Doornpoort. So people can just contact. If you look at my ugly face, you'll find it on Facebook quickly. You just and you can arrange that you go and see it, because you know what happened when we started, when we founded this. We sent out. Let's see if I can. I think it's something like 44 applications, 440 applications that we sent out, and 67 responded. It's as if people find out what it's all about, and they've been there, and then they just don't want to join. Then you hear people saying, "I want to forget those days." I don't know. I don't want to forget that made who I am today. And then luckily, at the beginning, we had people that I was in the Rhodesia. You were on the RSA border. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you were. The camaraderie between these people is absolutely. It's something you can't dish up. Something you can't make up. It's just something that happens. And you know, the other organizations see this. This is what they respect us for. People are always neat and tidy. We check up on each other, and these guys are committed. They are very. So then every year when we go there, that's our super day for the year. We have our memorial service, and
Well, gentlemen, let me first say to you that I'm speaking on behalf of no one and no organization except myself and Legacy Conversations. Now, when I heard the news that the Voortrekker Monument declined to have a SAP coin statues there with them at the Wall of Remembrance there at the back, I was very annoyed by that, with every reason in the book. And so I approached them, and I found real old school gentlemen there, real good people, real men, people who was not afraid to speak their mind and was doing a lot of good work for the Afrikaner. And I asked them about it, and they said to me, look, it did happen. It's regrettable. And if SAP Coin wants to bring their statues there, I will definitely assist them in doing that. Of course, SAP Coin is not going to do it, simply because it's going to cost a lot of money, and the statues were moved already, and they are settled where they are. And so the matter is resolved. It's finished. There's really nothing much more to say about it. There's no hard feelings. There's no anger. There's no issues. So this is done. The statues will stay at the place where they are right now, and Voortrekker Monument will carry on and do the good work which they do. So let's carry on with the video, and let's see what else we found out here.
every year I meet more and more families of people who's on that wall. So we get them first to lay a wreath and pay the respects. So, yeah. And then there's also a little smaller wall, and this is what is scary. Starting in 2014, we are in 2025 now. We have a roll of honor of, I think, 28 league members that died. Since we started in 2014, 28 is a huge amount. And you know what's scary? It's people our age. They just they pass on. But we have a special wall there then where we put specifically the league names. And we do not um, distinguish between supporters and veterans. And there are two names on there with the names Marcus and Wilkia. They were fully fledged members, supporter members of the SAP Coin unit. Those were our service dogs, the ones that laid the wreath for Wolfie that's now being used. So a member was a member. We put them in the order that they died, and we don't distinguish between who was chairman and who was what, was a veteran, was a supporter. We're quite proud of that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think I recall in the old police dog school in Pretoria West, which don't exist anymore, but it did in my time. I was there. We also had like a memorial there, or like the statues, two of them. One was of a bloodhound, the other one was an Alsatian. And then there was the policeman in his camo with the Alsatian as well. I wonder what happened to those statues. Would they have gone over to a new dog school?
I suppose they would. I don't really know for a fact this, but they won't get rid of them because a dog handler was a dog handler. Way back's the same as now, so they will keep that. I was actually now asked to make a presentation on the 30th of March. At the Voortrekker Monument, they have a day Animals at War, where I talk about I'm going to do the same thing, give the history of the coin unit, and I'm going to specifically talk about the police dog that died in active service, which was handled by Rickert, and the dog's name was Liu. They on their first day of counterinsurgency duty, I think they went over a landmine and they were both killed in that explosion. So yeah, then the other one you're talking about, that's dogs that died in the line of service. Also normal police duties, people shooting them or what. But specifically, there's a difference between animals at war and police patrol dogs that did their job in another way. But I have one member with the name of Christo Marx. His dog, specifically MK, is an opslagplek where they put the ammunition and the explosives.
Cache.
He would,
Cache. Arms cache.
Yeah. This dog of Christo Marx name, he would sniff them all out. That was also counterinsurgency, but his name was Zandru, what this patrol dog. So every year you can see Christo coming and he laser eat every of this dog. But this Zandru really had these people on their toes because it was an arms cache, he would sniff it out. But that was coin duty in a different way. Understand what I'm saying? But still coin related. So all those dogs, and that there I give the credit to Schaefer Mark, our dog handler, who was responsible for the memorial, or shall I say the memorial panel of the dogs on our memorial. And he's also the one you will see in action when we go to the memorial services of other people where he uses the dog and lays the wreath. Normally in a Parabat uniform, but sometimes in the coin uniform, and it doesn't matter. It's got two chairs to sit on.
Yeah, I believe that SAP tracker dogs were actually before the Alsatians came along. And I also know that two of them were involved in the Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya, even before our time, which shows you how long that goes back. But we can sit here and talk forever. I mean, I really enjoy this. I would love to attend some of your meetings, and I hope that Legacy will be recording some of them at least. If we can get people to attend. And thank you for what you're doing. We're really grateful. I mean, this is long overdue.
Well, we didn't know about you, but now you are more than welcome. And unfortunately, we have your email address now, so we are going to definitely we'll send you the invitation because we're not scared of inviting people. Because this is where we actually remember them that went past. And you will hear the last post, and you will hear the 2 minutes of silence, and it's always explained. The first minute, we remember those that didn't make it, or paid the highest sacrifice. The second minute, we think we are thankful for those that made it. And we are actually back to tell the story and carry the legacy forward. So, yeah, I will send it to Legacy, and then you can decide who you want to attend. And you're more than welcome to shoot whatever you want to. Don't shoot with a rifle, just shoot with a camera then. But yeah, it was really nice talking to you. Yeah, let's get the story out there. I mean, it took me 10 years. I wouldn't say to educate, but to be able to inform people that who we were, that those few policemen that were attached to the SAP Coin unit were warriors. We were not policemen. We were there to fight. And as I'm saying, there's 108 names to prove that we did our thing. Same with Kufut. They have their names on their wall, and there's a lot of people there. They did their best as well. Policeman was never scared. Those scared ones didn't go to the wall. But anyway.
That is so true. I mean, it's one of a few occupations in life where something explodes and you run towards. You don't run away. Something happens and you're there. And because the public are looking up to you, they take command. There's no way in the world that you're going to sit there with soft hankies and you don't know what to do. No, you know what to do. And I thank our instructors too. I would like to get hold of the guys of Milieuskop, come and talk to me. We have our horrible unit as well. It's a smaller one of Milieuskop. Verdrag with his marathon every Saturday. You would be surprised, you people out here, how fit the SAP members really were in those days. Perhaps you don't remember, but I can show you pictures. Very fit young men.
Point is that the job that we did too. I mean, I walked everywhere I wanted to. I had Alsatian in 1983. I had to put squatters out of their misery because of the fact that the king wanted me to do it, King's Valentine, because it's Zululand. I don't take nonsense then, eh? But with all the walking and the serving notices, I actually walked my Alsatian to death. I did not gemaak. It was just too much. I think these hips gave in and was after about 3 or 4 days. So yeah, we were fit. We walked where we wanted to be, especially with border duty. You walk. You had to walk patrol. I must say on the SA borders it was a bit different. We did that in sections of 6 and in a vehicle, but it was a huge area that you had to cover. In Komati Poort, my last one, I used to go over the Lebombo Mountain and up to the Driehoek that they called it, where Swaziland, South Africa and Mozambique sort of came together. But that was much milder than we had Mozambique and Rhodesia. That was a full-scale war. In South Africa, people dealt with counterinsurgency, and you're talking about things about to go off. I must mention his name, and that's Fritz Rost. He's also one of the COIN members, and if you look on his chest, you'll see the Police Cross for Bravery Gold. He was one of the guys that, what is the word, diffused the Hallmark bomb seconds before it exploded in everybody's faces. So, yeah, there's tough guys in this league, but when we come together, all the same.
Well, let's hope we come together soon. And there's a standing invitation to all of you. Contact the captain, contact the league. Get yourself back into the fold. I'll definitely volunteer to go once again. So thank you for being here, and God bless to all of you out there until we meet again.
Thank you, Chris. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to receive notifications.